13th, and we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. Marilee, you want to lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, welcome everybody. We're going to begin this meeting with a public hearing, and this is relative to our proposed tax increment financing incentive district. And Angel, I believe you have some comments you want to make.
Yes, good evening, members of council. I just wanted to give a brief overview in advance of the public hearing. But as you know, on March 23rd, I provided council with an informational presentation regarding tax increment financing, with most of that presentation focused on TIF created under Section 5709.40C of the Ohio Revised Code, and that particular section addresses TIFs on residential property, which are also referred to as incentive districts. That, as you are well aware, is the subject of this evening's public hearing. Crawford Hoyne and the city are proposing the use of a 40C TIF within the Bridge Park development. It would allow improvements within the residential parcels to be considered a public purpose and exempt from taxation, but in its place have a service charge levered or payment in lieu of taxes, which would be used to finance public improvements. The Crawford Hoyne Bridge Park development currently has approximately 111 owner-occupied units proposed, with 41 of those being on the west side and 70 of those being on the east side. The process to establish an incentive district under 5709.40C includes notification to the property owners, and those notifications were sent via first-class mail on March 12th of this year to CODA, Crawford Hoyne, and the City of Dublin as the property owners within the proposed area. The public hearing, which will be held this evening, is the next step in the process, after which time we would bring forward for council consideration an ordinance that would create the incentive district. Having said all of that, in the middle of that, there are ongoing negotiations with Franklin County to come to some agreement with respect to revenue sharing that are required under code. The proposal for this tax increment financing incentive district is over the entire Bridge Park development site. While it would only apply to owner-occupied residential facilities, it does preserve the ability for, at some future point in time, the developer to convert any apartments or multifamily commercial units to owner-occupied residential. Obviously, any change like that would be subject to any provisions that would be negotiated within a development agreement. Upcoming steps after the public hearing this evening, as I mentioned, we will continue our negotiations with the Franklin County Commissioners, and at this point in time, we would expect to bring forward a TIF ordinance for not only this incentive district, but also a regular TIF district for first reading on May 14th with a second reading on May 18th, and both of those dates are estimated at this point in time. Thank you. Very good.
So at this juncture, we'll open the public hearing, and we have testimony from those who've signed up to speak, and I see Ms. Grooms has signed up. Is she here? Would like to come forward and give your name and address for the record?
Good evening. My name is Chris Ambrose Grooms, and I live at 5896 11 Links Court, Dublin 43017. If past performance is the best indicator for future behavior, let's take a look at some of the development as trendy as the one being contemplated in this TIF around Columbus. The City Center Mall opened in 1989 at a cost of $110 million in extensive study. It opened to full tenants, politicians cutting ribbons, balloons, and fanfare. That was its best day. Just 20 years later, in 2009, the owners of the mall gave the development back to the City of Columbus free of charge. The catch: it would cost $10 million to the taxpayers to tear it down. The total loss in value over those 20 years was $120 million. The reason given for its failure were the construction of new malls closer to the suburbs and a rise in crime in the area. The Continent opened in 1972, and was largely torn down in 1990 with similar investment loss. Some struggling businesses and apartments remain on the property today. Their residential rents begin with approximately the same as those being proposed in the development contemplated this evening. The reason given for its failure were high rents and traffic problems. Closer to home, Terraza at Corazon had predicted valuations nearly 400% higher than current market value, resulting in a nearly $7.2 million judgment against the developer. The reason given for its failure was the failure of the neighboring development, Corazon. This evening, the City of Dublin and all of its residents are contemplating a 30-year straight TIF that will raise no incremental value funds to our school system, our fire and EMS services, and the 10 other entities that property taxes fund. The difference between this TIF and the ones that have been used successfully in the past is this TIF is being used to bring more apartment housing to the City of Dublin, housing that the City of Dublin's Department of Taxation call a revenue loser. The land it sits on will only generate a bit over $160,000 a year for the school district. At today's cost, that will only educate 12 kids. That education cost will almost certainly increase 200 to 500% over the next 30 years, yet the funding will stay largely flat. The developer projects a mere 20 to 30 kids to come out of this 800-unit apartment complex. While I do not agree that only 2.5% of all 800 1-, 2-, and 3-bedroom apartments will generate just one child, the result will undoubtedly be students attending our schools with no funding to pay for their education, residents in need of fire and EMS care with no funding to provide, and disability, mental health, and other entities with folks that need services having zero funds in which to provide them. The choice is very clear to the residents of Dublin should City Council proceed with their recent pattern of following this trendy development, using our school, township, and other entities to fund and other entity funds to construct a poor quality version of the trendy apartment boom. The choice we will have to make is, do we wish to have a reduction in the quality of our schools, fire, EMS response time, and other services, or do we wish to pay more in taxes? While Muirfield Village, our city's first real residential development, did not use any TIF dollars to fund its development purely funded by the developer, Howard Adams said in the very early 1970s, as he was advocating for the development to Dublin's then village leaders, remember, he was not asking for any money, there won't be any children in Muirfield Village because the houses will be so expensive that families will not be able to afford to live in them. The average home in Muirfield is just 30 years old. Imagine if our schools had zero funding generated by that development to pay for all of the students that have been educated by our schools for the past 30 years. I would charge you not to use this kind of TIF to promote this kind of development on this kind of real estate in our city. It is some of the best we have on our riverfront. The citizens will ultimately have to pay for the unintended consequences. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. You know, I'd just like to comment that using City Center Mall and the Continent as examples are really apples and oranges compared to what we're talking about with this project. We have a lot of good reasons for that project. We've been dealing with this for 4 or 5 years. And the school numbers that you put out, there's $50 million going to the schools over the 30-year period. I think at $1.5 million a year. So you cite a number, but there's the other side of the story. So in any event, I don't know if staff wants to comment or anybody else.
If I could just add one more point of clarification, our compensation agreement with the school district calls for not a straight TIF for a 30-year period. What it calls for is in years 1 through 15 of any TIF created, that the city captures 100% of that, and then in the years 16 through 30, the schools capture 10% of what they would have received had the exemption not been put in place. So that would be regardless if we were talking about a CRA, whether we were talking about a TIF, because both are exemptions. But as you pointed out, that is in addition to the $1.5 million annually paid to the school district, which will total $50 million.
Very good. Thank you.
Excuse me, Mike.
Yes, please.
Correct me if I'm wrong. If I'm not mistaken, the property in question with respect to the Crawford Hoying proposal is currently generating $400,000 per year in revenue? Property tax revenue to the schools?
Yes, somewhere between $350,000 to $400,000 in the property owned by Crawford Hoyne at this point in time. There is some additional parcels that the city owns that are generating revenue, but that's only because the exemptions haven't come through based on the city's ownership.
Right, and just to be clear, that's versus the revenue, well, the payments that the city is making under this agreement, which is in excess of $1 million per year, you know, with the additional provisions that you mentioned, you know, if there's a greater return.
Correct. We might have said this a couple of weeks ago, I'm not sure, but in order for the school district to get $1.5 million in revenue in any given year, based on today's commercial tax rates, that necessitates approximately $65 million in new valuation being created.
Good. Just wanted to make that point. Thanks.
Yeah, and you've cited a couple examples here, but there's numerous. The vast majority of examples, certainly that we've used here in Dublin, have proven to be a vast benefit to all the entities, the schools, the township, the city, over many, many years. So, you know, I think it's a little disingenuous to cite those two. All right, we have another speaker, Denise France King, if you'd like to come forward. Hi.
Good evening, members of City Council and staff and my fellow citizens of Dublin. First of all, I wanted to give these to you. We have a letter for you tonight. We wanted to make sure you were aware of a situation. We didn't think you were aware of it, and so we just want to bring it to your attention. And we have great faith that you will honor our longstanding relationship and find a solution working with us. Good evening. My name is Denise Franz King. I'm the chair of the Board of Trustees of the Washington Township, of Washington Township. I thank you for this opportunity to testify as you consider the pros and cons of implementing a new type of tax increment financing district, or TIF, utilizing a community reinvestment area, or CRA, and moving forward with the Bridge Park New Community Authority. The township understands that the City of Dublin's motivation to entice private development and finance capital improvements within the boundaries of the City of Dublin and Washington Township, since we are coterminous, are largely coterminous. Our organizations have a long history of collaborating for the best outcomes for our community. This letter intends to convey our desire to continue to build on this foundation of trust and reciprocity for the benefit of the 43,000 citizens we share. For decades, the township has served as Dublin's primary fire and EMS service provider. In this role, the township has responded to Dublin's fast-paced growth by ensuring that residents and corporate partners receive top-notch emergency services that they desire. Last year, these services included answering nearly 5,000 emergency calls, one for every 17 residents and businesses in the community, and inspecting over 2,000 businesses for fire code compliance. The township also supports the city by reviewing building and site plans, a function critical to fire and life safety, and also we deliver safety education programs to Dublin's businesses and residents. And I might add, the schools. These services help protect over $5.6 billion in appraised real estate, utility, and personal property assets, and an undeterminable value in human life. Currently, the township delivers all of its fire services at a cost of $412 per resident per year. The city's desire to utilize economic development incentives and incentives impact the property tax distribution is of significant concern to the township. Let me just repeat that. The city's desire to utilize economic development incentives that impact the property tax distribution is a significant concern to the township. Developments such as the one proposed with the ORC 570940C, TIF, CRA, and the Community Authority will demand more fire service, more EMS, more safety services than the development patterns assigned to that land today. And there's a lot of exciting things about that development, but there is a cost. The new pattern of land use will not cover these increased service demands for at least 30 years. I think we can do better. I think we can fix this. In 2014, the city reported that the total assessed valuation for the city's TIF districts in Franklin County totaled $489 million. This $489 million valuation is exempt from the township's property taxes, but is equivalent to 22% of the township's Franklin County tax base. That's more than we had expected. Further, the use of community reinvestment area with a TIF strips the township from receiving any revenue from the commercial building owners or individuals that will be residing within the CRA for up to 15 years. With these future residents and corporations relieved of their share of the cost of emergency services, the cost burden will shift to the remaining property tax-paying residents and businesses. I don't think that's what you intended. The city's aggressive approach to funding public infrastructure with property tax exemptions is not without consequences to our community. At a time when the city seeks growth, the township is attempting to plan diligently to live within the resources approved by voters. If growth occurs without a way to capture revenue from the growth, the township will have to employ one or more of the following options. 1, reduce the level of services and increase emergency response times. 2, seek voter approval for a tax increase and/or institute fee for services. Another key concern to the township is a change in state law in 2013, which I also don't think was on your radar, that removes the state funding for property tax rollbacks under certain scenarios. Property tax owners enjoy these rollback provisions, it can be as much as 12.5%. They will again become liable for these payments if the township needs to pursue a replacement or increased millage in our levy. And the levy is up again on its 5-year cycle this November. Under these scenarios, the township does not necessarily experience significant gains in revenue. Rather, the state funding match is lost under that new law, and the property owner accepts the 12.5% increased tax burden. This shifted tax burden would be approximately $40 for every $100 of market value for a property. You know better than I what the average market value of a house is in Dublin. I suspect it's somewhere around $300,000. So that's an automatic increase of 120, regardless of what else we have to come up with. The city's continued use of property tax exemptions increases the likelihood that the township will need to increase the millage for fire and EMS services to keep them at the same level. While the city has the ability to offset expenses with other revenues, notably its income tax, the township has no recourse. The fire department lives and dies by its temporary 5-year levy. Our requests are simple. As community partners, we ask that you communicate with us about your desires and goals for the use of property tax exemptions. And second, as our shared mission to serve the people of Dublin, please recognize and remedy the negative impacts of redirecting the fire department's property tax funding for development. We know you can do this. We'd like to help. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee King. You know, I'd be remiss if I didn't just add that over the years, when I started as a trustee in 1983, our budget was about $300,000. And today I know you're well into the $24 million range. And we've always utilized tax increment financing in due in large part the growth of Dublin due to those mechanisms. You probably voted on many yourself as a council person.
Not as many as you might think.
So in any event, it has been the strategy and the way the city has grown, and I believe the township has benefited immensely over the years. I hear what you're saying. We will review this. We'll look at it. Much like we worked very hard on the community authority issue in Tartan West, that was a very painful process, but we worked together and we got through it. So we hear you, and we'll take the letter under advisement.
I appreciate that. The township has always been there for the city, and we want that to continue.
Very good. Thank you.
If I could follow up, Ms. King, please. Can you tell us what the township's current annual revenues versus expenditures is?
Our expenditures for the fire department is about $21 million. We are in the process, as you know, of divesting ourselves of our parks department in order to concentrate on our main service, which is fire and EMS. But the parks department is probably $500,000. About $600,000. Okay, $600,000.
Which is many of those assets being purchased by the city, correct?
Yes, and then the balance that we have is being used to prolong the levy so that we don't have to ask for as much as soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mayor, if
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think I got an answer to the revenue side of it.
No.
What's the total budget? The current,
No, I want
Revenue.
About $25 million a year.
about 25 million is the revenue.
24, 25.
No, the revenue.
Sarah, do you have something more specific? Sarah Ott is our township administrator, as
We
you
know her well.
And you know she knows her numbers.
Good evening, Sarah Ott, 6200 Emerald Parkway. Pleasure to see you all this evening. Currently, our 20, I'm going to give you 2014 numbers so you have actuals in our current budget. Our 24 actuals for the fire fund, which is what we've brought for you this evening, revenues were at $20,124 and $20,124,000 and some change. Expenditures were at $20,037,000. I think what's key is that sometime I've heard reference to the fund balance of the township, and that should be taken into consideration in this conversation. And I'll share with you that the true intent is to spend down that fund balance and to put it to use in lieu of having to ask for a higher tax increase in the levy planning. And diligent spending will let that happen, but the unknown factor is truly what's going to be happening with additional exemptions in the community. And so we want to work with you to see if we can find a positive resolution to that situation.
What's the total revenue? I know that you gave me the fire number there, but what's the total?
Sure. Total, I did not bring the miscellaneous small funds for road and bridge with me, but total revenue last year was around $22.5 million.
And that includes inside millage and the general fund?
Yes, that includes the general fund. General fund and fire fund is around $22.5 million.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Ott, would you agree that, you know, looking at this long term, as you well know, the city always does, that to the extent that this contributes to the overall health of our local economy, that the increase in non-exempt properties could potentially be significant over time? Mr. Keenan, or Mayor Keenan, you know, talked about the many tax or TIF agreements, you know, that have been in place over the years, and the significant increase or substantial increase in township revenues over that same period of time.
Our current valuation just recently hit back prior to 2008 values. So we just went over $2 billion as the taxable valuation for the township. And you know, if the city would like to work with us to figure out what that number is, we'd be very open to that. Is there some attributable factor? Yes. At some point, though, there's a saturation point when it's 22% of your tax base that is not contributing because their funds are being redirected into pilot payments in lieu of that property tax. So we just need to figure out where that right point is. Our concern is if the trend continues, that point of 22% is going to climb upwards, and it is shifting the tax burden to the rest of the property owners within our jurisdiction.
You know, to Tim's point, one of the things we're concerned about is maintaining the health of our current corporate citizens that pay a large share of the tax. And to that end, we've been told by our consultants that we really need to have this kind of development to have the workforce that's going to serve those tech businesses, those software, the bioscience kind of businesses that want to relocate here. So this is a broader picture than just one development. It really is an overall strategy that council's employed here. So I'd like to at least make that point.
Absolutely. I mean, and the township is not opposed to growth occurring. We're asking, though, for dialogue and conversation,
Sure.
and support, and remedying the revenue issue that comes with it, with the service demands that the township will have due to that growth.
And you mentioned that you had some money that you would be spending down. What's your current balance?
Our current fund balance at the end of 2014 was in the fire fund at about $19 million.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
I just wanted to comment that I know I had a meeting with Denise, and this is one of our topics, but currently, if I understand correctly, the way the Ohio Revised Code reads is that TIFs are, the fire departments are exempt, fire levies are exempt from TIFs unless otherwise demonstrate, that
Well, townships are not afforded the same protection as county agencies or school districts underneath the TIF laws.
Right.
That is
but
correct.
there is legislation in now to correct that problem.
Yes, the Ohio Township Association has been advocating for about 8 years for a change to the TIF statute to address that issue.
Let's let this letter serve as the beginning of some dialogue then, and I appreciate you bringing it forward.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'm curious.
Dana, you wanted to add something?
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Maybe you'll answer my question.
I don't. Just a few things here. First, I want to acknowledge and thank the Washington Township trustees and Sarah specifically for reaching out and asking us as staff to come to their two meetings here recently, and I just want to acknowledge that and thank them. Secondly, though, at the same time, I want to say sorry I haven't done that yet, only because before we come and do that, I want to make sure we have our numbers in hand and that the proposed development before us is a little bit more mature in terms of its concepts before I would get out ahead of things and start talking too many numbers to folks. So I acknowledge the invitation, and with the township trustees sitting here, I want to say we will definitely be there, and we will be there often and soon with that kind of information. Secondly, I wanted to point out that Ms. King had read into the record, and I want to make sure Ann caught this, that she had mentioned $40 per every $100 of market value of property when it's $40 for every $100,000. And I didn't want anyone to hear that and freak out that it was $100 per, but I didn't mean to correct you, Ms. King. I just wanted to make sure that got in the record. The other thing, just to let you know how some of these numbers are starting to shape, is that the total value of property within the Bridge Street District is at about $321 million. We estimate that generates in revenues to the township about $1.2 million per year, which represents about 6% of its total revenue. We don't know that that's exactly right. We think that's pretty on spot, but we'll talk about those kind of things when we come see you. Specifically, the Crawford Hoying site that's under consideration relative to the discussion here at hand in this public hearing currently pays, we estimate, about $78,000 per year for those parcels under consideration to the township. With the proposed improvements, should those happen, that could generate as much as $800,000 a year to the township. However, hear you loud and clear that that would not be realized for a few years, obviously, and there could be service demands in the interim. So we recognize that, understand that, and the reason I bring that up is that we know that we need to work with you relative to those potential service increases or demands for service should those happen in an interim period. But at the same time, I want to reemphasize that these kind of tools are critical to consider when we talk about redevelopment. And in the history of the city of Dublin, we've not leveraged these kinds of economic development tools and when it comes to the opportunities for redevelopment, because those opportunities have not been there. As your economic development director for the better part of 10 plus years, I couldn't get anyone to move on anything in this property until the Bridge Street District came along. That property, and I'm kind of surprised it wasn't brought up in the examples about Dublin Village Center that's laid dormant for the better part of 30 years and generating nothing but declining property value. So these kind of things need to be looked at relative to bringing value that does ultimately help schools, townships, and others to collect revenue down the road. So I didn't mean to lecture anyone, but I wanted to get those. I wanted to demonstrate to everyone that we are looking deep into these numbers. Not that these are the answers, and I'm not trying to show off numbers, but just let you know there's kind of light at the end of the tunnel on getting these numbers to everyone and that we are analyzing them. I just want to let everyone know I'm not aggressively getting out there and talking about them at length until we feel they're fully baked, not half baked, as I tell people. So, just want to make you aware of that.
Thank you, Amy.
I just wondered, Angel, what Dana just said about this entire Bridge Street area being about 6% of the township's revenue squares with it being about 6% of our city. So I'm assuming that that's about why we're looking at that number.
And not necessarily. These were taken right off tax rolls that Angel's been researching, but it's an interesting correlation.
Yeah, it's not linear though. Probably.
Okay. All right. And so right now it's generating $321 million, $1.2 million to the township. And the part that we're talking about under consideration this evening is $78,000 worth of income to the township at this point in time versus $800,000 perhaps if the development's built.
Right, and to the township's point, if this is TIF, if they may not realize that revenue for a number of years, but
Right.
Nonetheless, that's what it could potentially generate on the back end. So.
Right. But at the heart of this is a question over, is the community going to grow and change or not? Because in order to remain healthy and viable, a community has to grow and change. There's, no other way around it. And the key is, how are we going to grow? And at this point, talked about redevelopment. I think that's a really interesting point because you can redevelop or you can grow out. And so we're choosing, to grow where, in effect, redevelop what we have. And, I think about the areas that we're talking about. Dublin Village Center, Bridgepoint Shopping Center. I've lived here for 22 years. That shopping center's never been healthy, ever. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind. And, as council, we started thinking about 5 to 6 years ago really hard about the future of Dublin and what is it that we need to do to keep ourselves as economically sound going forward as we have been in the past. We all know the solid foundation, and we started to ask the question. So this is a 5-year study, and it's brought us, here tonight. So it's frustrating.
It is.
When it comes out that, we're, playing fast and loose with the purse strings suddenly, and that just couldn't be further from the truth.
Interestingly, I was with a friend last week in Knoxville, and Greenville's nearby, and he had just spent some time in Greenville. There's some current P&Z commissioners and some former, as well as many city councilmen that went and visited that city. And he was just there in the last month or two, and he said it's vibrant, it's an absolutely incredible downtown. They went through a very similar redevelopment stage, and so those are the kind of things that we're trying to accomplish here. And I think that's a shining example of a city that did it and moved forward, and it's proved to be very beneficial. So, anybody else? If not, I'll declare the public hearing closed. And with that, we'll move on to our proclamation, special recognition. This is National Volunteer Week from April 12th to April 18th. I just want to mention that the Wendy's company has been instrumental in volunteer group over the years for the Dublin community. In 2014, associates volunteered in our park system with a large beautification planning at Avery Park, and again in the fall by dispersing to all 56 parks for a walk in the park, where they send in live web-based feedback on park conditions and maintenance. And as I understand it, Wendy's will once again be conducting a parks project in May of 2015. And today with us we have Dave Frisora, Director of Government Relations and Corporate Affairs for Wendy's. Welcome.
Thank you.
And I have a proclamation for you. Whereas the entire community can inspire, equip, and mobilize people to take action that changes our communities, our nation, and our world. and whereas volunteers, professional service corps members, corporate citizens, and social entrepreneurs connect with local service opportunities through service organizations and local governments, and whereas individuals and communities are at the center of social action, discovering their power to make a difference. And whereas during this week, all over the nation, citizens are recognized for their commitment to service, and experience teaches us that the government by itself cannot solve all of our nation's problems. Whereas our country's volunteer force of over 63 million is a great treasure, and whereas our country's volunteer force of over 63 million is indeed a great treasure, the City of Dublin's active volunteer force is a diverse pool of talented individuals who make a positive social and economic impact on our community. And whereas volunteer engagement is a vital partnership and valued citizen relationship within the City of Dublin, now therefore I, Michael H. Keenan, Mayor of Dublin, on behalf of Dublin City Council, do hereby proclaim April 12 to 18, 2015 as National Volunteer Week in the City of Dublin, and urge citizens to volunteer in their respective communities. By volunteering and recognizing those who serve, we can inspire others to act by encouraging leadership, understanding, and compassion. Thank you. Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. You know, one of Mr. Thomas's 5 values is give something back, and we have been doing that, I think, since day one at Wendy's. We are proud to be good corporate citizens and partners with the City of Dublin, and we will continue to do this going forward. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, we're at the citizen comment section. I don't believe anybody signed up tonight, Ann, so we will move on. Move on to the consent agenda. Does any council member have any item they'd like to remove from the consent agenda? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the actions for the 4 items that are listed on the consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ann.
Saleh? Mr. Lecklider?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mayor Keenan?
Yes.
Ms. Genesee Zerker?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson? Vice Mayor Gerber?
Yes. And first reading, we have ordinance.
Mayor,
Oh,
if
I'm
I may,
Please. Oh, I'm sorry.
We have,
we had a couple of special presentations on the agenda. I don't know if you wanted to hold those till later, or if you wanted to.
You're right, I did.
Sorry. Thank you.
Good evening, members of council.
Sorry, Sandra. We were moving
Feeling
things along.
invisible all of a sudden here. This evening, we have a presentation from Dr. Marty Saperstein. We've been working with his firm for the last several years, and tonight he's here to share with you results of the National Citizen Survey, and then a quick recap of the findings of the Bridge Street District from several of our forums and surveys. I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Sandra. Marty, welcome. Sorry about that.
You know, half the audience left, and then you're like pushing me to the back. Jeez.
Some people needed to hear it.
Yeah, unfortunately, the audience needed to hear this.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'd like to spend my time with you reviewing the results of the National Citizen Survey, which are recently released, and then talk a little bit about some Bridge Street District data. 2 things you should know. One is that my firm did not conduct the National Citizen Survey. That was done by the National Research Center and ICMA. And the Bridge Street District section includes some data that I collected and some data that comes from the custom questions from the National Citizen Survey. And the second point to be made is that I'm going to share with you tonight results for the community in total, but also available are the results by ward. So if a council member has an interest in looking more closely at the data by ward, that is possible to do. So let me begin with the National Citizen Survey. As you probably know, approximately 2,000 Dublin households received mailings in the first week of January, and the questionnaire that was in those mailings contained more than 130 individual questions or individual items. And then by mid-February, 780 questionnaires had been returned for a response rate of 40%. And for those of you thinking about, gee, is that a good response rate or not for a mail survey, that is a fabulous response rate. And part of that response rate comes from the high interest nature of the survey. So the NCS is built on 3 pillars, and one of those pillars has to do with community characteristics. And the questions that deal with community characteristics focus on the question, what makes a community livable, attractive, and a place where people want to be? And you can see underneath some of the examples. And then the second pillar deals with governance, and it focuses on the question, how well does the government of Dublin meet the needs and expectations of its residents? And then has to do with things like police and fire and snow removal and garbage collection. And then the final pillar is called participation, and the question that it focuses on is, are the residents of Dublin connected to the community and each other? And it's a little different because it's a series of questions that deals less with what the city does for folks than with what the folks do in the city. So, for example, have they stocked supplies for an emergency or used public transportation? So the results of the survey that you'll see tonight are compared with 82 benchmark districts across the country, and this is really important. This is one of the primary reasons why you do the National Citizen Survey, because it's one thing to know where you stand, but it's often helpful to know how you compare to comparable communities. And these comparable communities have populations of 25,000 to 55,000 demographics similar to Dublin. There's 82 of them, and 3 were local, Gahanna, Upper Arlington, and West Virginia. And then there are sub-examples of, Westerville. And then you can see examples of some of the other communities outside of Ohio. So let's talk about general findings. So this chart, across the top, you'll see in green the 3 pillars: community characteristics, governance, and participation. And down the side in yellow, you'll see what they call the facets. So from general on down to community engagement are the facets. And then these numbers here, these little numbers, they reflect the number of items or questions for each of these facets across the different pillars. So for example, that little 7 represents those 7 questions. And so this is where the 133 different items come from. So if you look below, you'll see that dark blue will mean ratings higher than the benchmark on average, and the middle color, the lighter blue, is most ratings are similar to the benchmark, and then the bottom, the lighter color, the lightest color, most ratings are lower. So overall wraps up all of the facets, and what you see is that for community characteristics and governance, Dublin scores higher than most of the benchmark communities. Most of its ratings are higher than the benchmark average. But then if you go down, you'll notice that not only does Dublin score higher than the benchmark overall, but on all but one community characteristic facet and all of the governance facets, Dublin is higher than the benchmark communities. And with participation, with one exception, it's similar to the benchmark communities. But this tells you that you may be better than the benchmark communities, but it doesn't tell you how good you are. Because if the benchmark communities aren't doing well, you could be doing a little bit better than not well. This chart tells you a little different story. So this number here, I'm going to point to this 92%. This number says that the average of the general rating, the average of those 77 dimensions or questions or items, the average rating is 92%. 92% gave a positive response to those items. So if you look at the darkest color, the orange there, you'll see Most of those items in governance, many of those items in community characteristics, the average rating was at least 90% for most of them, and then a couple here in the high 80s. So you can see that this orange box represents average ratings of 85% or more. So if the previous chart talked about being better than the comparable communities, this chart says, boy, this city is rated highly by its residents. Let's move on to some of the specifics. So one specific worth noting is that 98% of the respondents to this survey said Dublin is an excellent or good place to live. On these dimensions, Dublin ranks first in the country. For all the communities that NCS measures, these are the highest ratings in the country, from overall appearance on down to employment opportunities. These dimensions, higher ratings than most other communities. The other thing to note is that from 2012 to 2015, there was a survey done by NCS 3 years ago. 70 of the 92 items changed no more than plus or minus 3 percentage points. And then if you go all the way back to, I think, the first survey, 2009, so in those 6 years, 61 of the 89 items changed less than plus or minus 3 percentage points. So what that paints is a picture of great stability, yet the stability notwithstanding, several items did change by more than plus or minus 3 percentage points, and they hint at some noteworthy trends. So, for example, won't be too surprising, if you look at traffic flow in major streets, you'll see that in 2009, 67% gave a positive rating, declined to 63% in 2012, and lost a percentage point well within sampling error this year. So I always like to see trends when the numbers are generally high. Gives you some sense of it's declining but still high. This is a good time to be thinking about that. Public library services, I know there's move afoot to redo the library, rebuild the library. So we moved from 88% positive, 93% positive last survey, and this survey dropped to 85%. Inviting citizen involvement, that dropped from 77 to 76 to 72 this year, still high, but lower than 2012. But then look at employment opportunities has been on the rise from 63 to 73 to 73 to 74. And economic development was in the mid-80s. Now 90% give a positive rating of economic development. And then, in an effort to be fair, I lined up all of the items on each pillar, and I thought, well, the ones that are high, you can probably leave alone. The ones that are at the bottom, maybe ones you'd want to work on. So this is the bottom 5 for community characteristics, and what you can see is that of the bottom 5, 3 of the bottom 5, although lower than the 40 above it, were still better than 50% giving positive ratings. Cost of living, a little bit under 47% positive ratings, and ease of travel by public transportation probably won't surprise anyone. And what's important to see something like that is it gives you some confidence that when people were responding to the questionnaire, they were actually reading the question, as opposed to going check, 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 check. So this is the bottom 5 for community characteristics. Seeing traffic flow up there probably won't surprise anyone either, same as public parking. This is the bottom 5 for governance, and the point I made earlier is truer here. 4 of the 5 bottom 5 are still 65% or better. So traffic signal timing is 3 from the bottom, but still 72% give a positive rating. And then participation, and again, this is what residents are doing in the community as opposed to what you're doing for the community. And here you can see the bottom 5 of those 32 items. So it's not surprising that only 6% use public transportation given what we saw earlier. So key takeaways from this. First, among local residents, impressions of Dublin are highly positive. Not every community would learn that 98% say that their community is a good place to live. On almost every facet of community characteristics and governance, positive impressions of Dublin exceed those of the NCS benchmark communities, the 82 of them. Dublin ranks first in the nation on these 8 items: overall appearance, overall economic health, health and wellness opportunities, economic development, overall built environment, land use planning and zoning, and employment opportunities. And then on most of the items measured, the findings this year are very similar to those of the city's previous NCS surveys, suggesting that residents continue to believe that Dublin truly is an outstanding community. So the point of my last bullet is that this is in some ways not new news. The news was positive in the earlier surveys, and they continue to be positive now. So we talked a little bit about the National Citizen Survey, and all of those items were their standard items. That's what's in every survey. But now let's talk about the Bridge Street District. And the Bridge Street District, we have 4 data sources. So we have the Community Attitude Survey, which my firm conducted in 2013. And then we have the Community Forum, and you may remember that was held at the OCLC Conference Center. And then we have the Communications Advisory Committee, which you may all remember as the Transportation Advisory Committee, which is morphed into the Communications Advisory Committee. And so that takes us up to January 15th, a date that I remember because that was the national championship football game. And then the final data source back to the National Citizen Survey, those are the custom questions, which we added to their standard questions. So let's talk first about the Community Attitude Survey. So as you'll remember, more than 400 Dublin voters were interviewed on landlines and cell phones. And then somewhere probably about 60% of the way through the questionnaire, residents were told of 9 potential community initiatives, and then they were encouraged to identify their highest priorities. And this chart shows on the left the 9 initiatives, and then the blue bars are representing the percentage of residents who said make that among the 2 highest priorities. And what you'll see is that for a plurality of residents, improving the flow of traffic was a top priority, followed by implementing the Bridge Street District. That's this 37% here. What's interesting about this, though, is that the items I have in red are related to the Bridge Street District, so encouraging more shops and restaurants to locate, more bike paths and parkland. They're components of the Bridge Street District, but what's interesting to me is the Bridge Street District overall rates higher than does its component parts. And then we asked the question about familiarity, and what we learned is that half the residents consider themselves either very or somewhat familiar with plans for the Bridge Street District. And interestingly enough, this survey was done early to mid-February, and there was an article in the paper, both the Dispatch and This Week, prior to that, so we wondered if that might have inflated the numbers some. But at the end of the day, it looks like roughly half back in 2013 were familiar with the Bridge Street District. And then we drilled down a little bit more in the Bridge Street District, and residents were queried about 4 components of the Bridge Street District and tried to get a sense of where they wanted their priorities, where they wanted your priorities to be. And these were the 4: more parkland along the river, including the bridge, more civic activity, and that would come from having more green space, a plaza, city offices, a new library, expanding Dublin's downtown east of the Sciato along Riverside Drive, and then more housing options within walking distance to the amenities within the Bridge Street District. And what we learned is that the more parkland and the more civic activity rated more highly than the other 2 dimensions, although all 4 of them were in roughly the same range. So interests are strongest in more parkland and additional space for civic activities. And those I think you're working on as well in the Bridge Street District currently. Let's talk a little bit about the community forum. So the Sciato River Community Forum was held, this was the end of October in 2013 at the OCLC Conference Center. And approximately 200 people attended. And I need to tell you that the 200 people that attended probably were not the most representative group. Those were probably people with an interest. The National Citizen Survey and the Community Attitude Survey probably are more representative. But what happens with folks who turn up to civic events like that, they're probably one of 2 groups or both of 2 groups. They're either folks who are very much in favor of it or folks very much against it. It's folks out in the tails of a distribution. So it will be interesting to see what this population thinks. And during the evening, 3 presentations were featured, one about infrastructure and parks, and then one about Bridge Park, and then a third on North Riverview by Jerry Bird. And every guest who attended received a little handheld device and was able to respond to our questions by clicking. And then, if you remember, we shared the results immediately. So one thing we know is that 1 guest in 3 is very familiar with the city's vision. This was then. For the Bridge Street District prior to the presentations. And what's interesting here is that the very familiar figure from the Community Attitude Survey was much lower, suggesting, well, yeah, this was a more interested group. Prior to the presentations, enthusiasm for the Bridge Street District was already high, especially among, look over here, so among our group 35 and younger, almost all of them were very enthusiastic with the Bridge Street District. And then you'll see 6% not enthusiastic, with everybody else in the middle category. So then the presentation transpired for infrastructure and parks, and then we asked the question, does the concept you've seen described, does that reflect what you think of as the goals for the Bridge Street District? And 91% said, yeah, what I've heard is consistent with what I'm expecting. And then the second presentation was about Bridge Park, and we asked the same question, is what you heard consistent with what you think of as the Bridge Street District? And here, 3 out of 4 of the attendees said yes. And then we drilled down a little more, and we asked about some of the discussion, some of the explanation of what was going to happen to Bridge Park. And so we listed what the speakers talked about, and restaurants was mentioned most often. 67% said they would be most likely to use the restaurants. And then the third presentation was on North Riverview, and the same question is what you heard consistent with what you're thinking of as the Bridge Street District, and 77% said yes. So then after the 3 presentations, we said, okay, so now how enthusiastic are you about or the Bridge Street District? And what you discover is that the numbers hardly changed at all. 67% were very enthusiastic before they knew all the details. And then now that they've learned more of the details, they're still very enthusiastic, more than 2/3. Communications Advisory Committee. I don't have numbers for this one because this was just a group discussion when the committee met. And one thing we learned right off the bat was, though every member was aware of the Bridge Street District, very few could articulate any kind of a vision or describe any of the elements composing it. Information about Bridge Street District was very scarce. And then we learned that most consider the Bridge Street District and the transportation projects two intertwined elements of the same initiative. And I know there was some talk initially of having a transportation committee and a Bridge Street District committee, but there was no distinguishing in the minds of the committee members between the two. And hence the name changed from transportation, from the Transportation Advisory Committee to the Communications Advisory Committee. And then it was also
Excuse me, Marty, I just want to point out that it's not really an overall change to your committee, but in that their focus is on communicating about the effects of the major projects that are going on in the community. They're being used as a sounding board to help us with the communication efforts. So, Sandra, who all is on that group?
That community committee. Yeah, these are not the same things. You're not, the conclusion you've drawn is not accurate.
Let me restate the point. So originally, the focus of this committee was going to be just on transportation. But then, after listening to them, it made it clear that they didn't separate the transportation projects from Bridge Street District. So it seemed, in thinking through what the communications might be to the community, that this committee should think about both the transportation issues and the Bridge Street District issues, in part because they were not distinguishable in the minds of the committee members.
I guess that I understand now what you're saying, and I'm thinking of a transportation committee we had years ago. Okay, so that was what was confusing. We don't really refer to this committee in the Bridge Street area as a transportation committee. But now that I hear your explanation, I understand. I think that when we first thought about it, we thought about the need for communication with this group about the transportation changes that would be occurring temporarily or permanently. But it became clear even before the meeting that it was really, their interest was more about, because of who made up the committee, about how we were going to help them in communicating to their public about these changes so that their business would not suffer from it.
And so there were civic organizations, and the schools were on this committee, and some small business owners, and some just community members were on this committee. So at the end of the day, it seemed that these committee members were as interested in sharing opinions about transportation as they were about the Bridge Street District.
Yeah, and that the members tend to be focused on the short-term impact. It's the same experience we just had at Bridge and High with the work down there and the discussion about whether the roundabout at Riverside would be shut down one way, two ways, all ways, or whatever. And that's your point.
Right, and the point to be made about the last bullet is that because they were so focused on the short-term impact, it blinded them to some extent to seeing the long-term benefit.
Right, these were business people.
For some of those folks, they weren't going to get to the long term because of the barriers they feared for the short term. So what were those? So these members reported that business owners, especially in historic Dublin, see the approaching wave of development as an existential threat. They're worried about traffic and detours and construction that will drive away customers, and they're thinking permanently, as opposed to construction comes, it's finished, customers come back, because there will be new places to shop and dine once the Bridge Street District construction itself is finished. And there was one committee member who described those as the shiny new pennies versus the red-headed stepchild.
But Marty, the restaurateurs, retail businesses will tell you that they do better when similar businesses are co-located. I know that for sure is true with restaurants in particular. The more you have in a given area, the better they all do.
Right. So don't look at me. Yeah. I mean, I'm just reporting what they said. I mean, so that would suggest.
Keep in mind, I skipped you to begin with.
So that would be something to be communicated to the businesses. So rather than being fearful, they should be happy as long as they can get through the short term. But having said all of that, all their concerns, members were still positive. Their impressions of the Bridge Street District were still positive. They still saw it ultimately as good for the community, even though in the short term they might suffer. And then members want the city to be proactive in communicating, especially with information that may help to mitigate short-term impacts. And what was interesting is they recognize that there's information on the website, but they want information pushed out to them, because many of these folks, knowing there was information at the website, did not go to look at it. They want their noses, they want it in their noses, in their faces. And then lastly, we return to the National Citizen Survey with custom questions. And so here, we learn that 3 out of 4 residents, that's 74%, consider themselves either very or somewhat familiar with the Bridge Street District, up from half in 2013. And then 7 out of 10 residents, and again, this is January, just 3 months ago, 7 out of 10 residents have favorable impressions of the Bridge Street District. And as we saw earlier, those with the most favorable impressions by age is that youngest age cohort. And you'll also notice that the very unfavorables are 4%, 14% unfavorable in total. And I mention that only because sometimes folks can be very vocal, and this should put what you hear in context. And then residents very familiar with the Bridge Street District are the most impressed. So of those folks who claim to be very familiar with the Bridge Street District, 46% had a very favorable impression. Everyone else who was less familiar with Bridge Street District, only 19% had favorable impressions. So that suggests as you continue to share information with them, they will move into the, I'm going to go back into the more favorable categories. And then more than 1 resident in 3 claims that the city provides too little information about Bridge Street District. So this parallels what we heard from the committee. They want more information. And then plans for the Bridge Street District are becoming a reality at an appropriate pace. There was some question, are things moving too quickly or too slowly? So you'll see 36% said an appropriate pace. A bunch of folks weren't sure. But then 14% did say too quickly, but an almost equal percentage said not quickly enough. So it's not clear that you can alter the speed and make a greater number of people happy. And then most residents feel that the city provides adequate opportunities for citizen participation, although, as you see in the light green, 61% had no opinion. But what's interesting is that the folks who said yes, city provides adequate opportunities, is almost identical to the percentage that said the city's not providing adequate opportunities. And then we asked an open-ended question, what are the potential benefits of the Bridge Street District? And we just took all of those open-ended responses, and we poured them into a Wordle maker. And what we learn is that restaurants and shops and a walkable community is what folks are anticipating as the benefits. And if you're not familiar with Wordles, the larger the word, the more time it gets mentioned. And then we asked, well, how about concerns about the Bridge Street District? What are you concerned about? In here, there wasn't much variety in the responses. Most folks are concerned about traffic. What are the takeaways from these data? So first, familiarity with the Bridge Street District has increased substantially since 2013. So 2 years ago it was about half, now it's roughly 3/4. 7 out of 10 residents have favorable impressions, only 1 out of 7 has unfavorable impressions, so 70% versus 14%. Residents familiar with the Bridge Street District are more likely than less informed residents to view it favorably. That's key. Many residents agree that plans for the Bridge Street District are becoming a reality at an appropriate pace. Many also agree that the city is providing adequate opportunities for citizen participation. According to many residents, the city is providing too little information about the Bridge Street District. And finally, the city should provide information proactively. Questions?
Very good. Council, any questions? Marty, we appreciate it. We appreciate all the insight and the work, and we'll look forward to the next one with all the percentages even higher.
Thanks.
So.
Mayor, I would just add that certainly, at staff, we'll take a look at the overall results of the NCS. We'll look at those areas that people seem to be concerned about. We'll address those relative to and offer suggestions as council has tasked us as a result of your retreat to look at strategic focus areas and goals. So we'll keep that under consideration. And obviously acknowledge one of the key points about some void in communication, which we're trying to rectify, and backing that up with key information points, revisiting our website relative to Bridge Street specifically, and then also making sure, as the discussion earlier tonight pointed out, getting that data that we've been working on out for everyone to understand. So we're working those angles.
Very good. Okay. We have another special presentation, ODOT Northwest 270-33 Interchange Project Communications. We have Nancy Burton with us from ODOT District 6, the Public Information Office.
Right, so Nancy Burton has been working with the City of Dublin now for a couple of years, and so tonight she wants to bring you up to date on the public information efforts of ODOT District 6 as it relates to 270 and talk about the partnership.
I know I'm getting some emails pretty regular, so thank you for that.
Thank you very much for having me. I put together this board to sort of summarize where we are presently. 1,700 people in 1 year have provided their emails to us requesting information about the project. And actually that number isn't correct. When I left the office at 6 o'clock to come here, it was 1735. But I made this board on Friday before I went for the weekend. But I guess my point is that it is on our website, it is on Dublin's website, how to submit your email and get that information. And that is about as direct as you can get. You can always, as I tell people, delete if you don't want that information. But our feeling is it's better to get that to you so that you are aware of what closures or restrictions there are before you leave home. Information is power. When you have that information, you can make better decisions about, for you, your family, your business, and what you do. Emails are merely one way we have communicated. We have face-to-face meetings, and have already done that. Last week on Tuesday, we met with every emergency responder that has jurisdiction at the 270-33 project. That includes townships, Dublin, sheriff, OSP, PD, Hilliard, Dublin, Marysville, and we armed them with information and contacts. And one of the questions asked by the OSP lieutenant was, at 3 a.m., when there's an incident on a Sunday morning, who's going to answer the phone? And are you going to answer the phone? And those numbers were provided to the emergency responders to get in touch with the contractor 24/7, because we know the impact that this project is having on this community as well as the corridor. Face-to-face meetings also included the PTO, Sells Middle School. I made a return visit. They asked us in November to come and speak to them. I'm sure because of their position. They're sandwiched between two projects. We just heard about one, and then our project. So I'm sure they're thinking, like every parent, as I am a parent, how do I get from point A to point B? Will we make the sporting event on time and dinner reservations for such and such celebration? Very honest, real questions, which is why we went and spoke to them and gave them that information. They could put a name with a face, they could get that information, and they had a direct point of contact instead of going through the phone tree at ODOT, which I wouldn't wish on anybody. So face-to-face meetings, emails, phone calls, our website. And it started really a year ago at the memorial, before the memorial tournament in 2014, when Sandra said we are going to kick off the information campaign about this project. We developed branding. That branding that you see is something we put on every information piece that we release because it's synonymous with the project. When people see that logo, they know it is about the project. And they can read it or delete it, but at least they are getting that information. And in a year and a half before that, Sandra said, come have lunch with me. Let's talk about how we get this information out. So it didn't start a week ago, it didn't start a year ago, it started much longer than that. And this isn't ODOT's first rodeo, and I don't say that to be flippant or sarcastic, but you don't need to be a road scholar to drive around 270 and see the projects that we have underway and the barrage of orange barrels and the impacts that we have on communities and what we need to do. So if we have to go talk to the Dublin school bus transportation department, we will, just as we did in Worthington. If we need to go talk to business owners to have brown bag lunches, we will. If we need to say business is open, we will. When we closed when we did the project 71-670, and we literally closed 670, a major route into downtown Columbus for a year, people thought, oh my word, the city of Columbus might as well just pull up stakes and go move somewhere else. Columbus remained open for business. Dinner reservations were met. People got married, babies were born, people were buried, people graduated from OSU, and the Buckeyes went on to win the championship.
There you have it.
Life goes on. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that it doesn't impact people. But the communications that we have right now with the City of Dublin and Sandra and her team, I am confident, not overly, but I am confident that we will exchange information and get people what they need to know. And I wanted to just update our efforts. We've just started moving dirt, but D-Day is June 8th, and I call it D-Day because it's after the tournament when the section of 33 East that will be closed for 4 months, which is a major construction. I know everyone's like, we'll get through it. But what I'm saying is already 1,700 people. The 71-670 project, over 3 years, we only had 1,000 people that wanted information. We're already at 1,700 and growing for this project. So there is a desire to get that information. We have to provide it. My job is to speak to the construction team who speaks to the contractor and make sure that I get that information and it's timely and it's accurate and it's concise and I release it.
Good. I know we're very confident in ODOT and the team work that's being put together, as well as Sandra's folks to get this out to the public. And I know that I get these emails and I forward them to my people within the office as soon as they come in, and I'm sure you're encouraging other business owners and hopefully the larger corporations as well to do the same thing.
There's already, because we see the email addresses, and I can list a host of businesses in Dublin of people that have said, let me get this information, sign me up.
It's painful now, but there would be more pain later if we do nothing, and that's part of what we're up to here. Marilee?
I think you do a great job, and I love to hear you on the radio all the time, you know, where you've been for years, really, and it's always good to put a face with a voice. But I think also the television channels have been doing a good job with the information that you've been providing them every morning and all. So I'm looking forward to having less people complain.
Indeed.
Well, that's a goal that I would love to. I guess I approach each day saying that we just want to be there for people when they do complain or if they do have issues. I think it would be foolish of me to say we'd like a day with no complaints. I don't think that's possible, but I think what's important, at least at ODOT, is that we provide that customer service. A number of times people will say, oh, I actually got a human, and I feel like I should start talking like a machine, but that we're there to answer their questions. When I know today the city of Marysville reached out because they wanted information in a different format. A police dispatcher at Dublin reached out after we said something because he wanted that information. He was working, I think, second shift over the weekend, wanted that information differently. And I think it's just responding so people know there is somebody there to answer their questions.
We appreciate all your hard work. Thank you.
So, Mayor, just real quick, there's information at your seats that Sandra and the team provided. There's, back to both the NCS and what Nancy had to say is we're very focused on being open for business and helping the businesses throughout the business district, keep traffic flowing to them and so forth. So I want to thank ODOT and ODOT District 6 for the great partnership we have with them.
And thank you, Sandra, as well, for your hard work on this.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing that we need to keep reminding ourselves and reminding our community is to keep the eyes on the prize. Because when this is complete, at both ends, we are going to have such a better transportation network. And you saw the traffic emblem up there as being something that people are talking about. I can't wait for that roundabout. I'm losing hours of life sitting at that traffic light.
And by the way, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Trustee Bostic. I didn't see you there earlier, so thank you for coming. You hiding on us? And Chief O'Connell. Okay, so we visited the consent agenda once. Are we done with that? We voted on it? Okay, just to make sure. So now we'll go to first reading, ordinance 27-15.
Approximately 3.5 plus or minus acres located at the east side of Tuller Ridge Drive between Tuller Drive and Rush Street from BSD Public District to BSD Residential District.
An introduction. Thank you. Jenny.
Good evening, Mayor and members of council. As you stated, this is a rezoning request. So the 3.5 acre site is a city-owned parcel located here on the east side of Tuller Ridge Drive. It's currently an undeveloped parcel. It's a passive park that was dedicated as part of the Sycamore Ridge apartment development. And this, as council is aware, this parcel was part of a land swap that was approved, development agreement as part of the future Tuller Flats development. So as part of that development, in order for that to move forward, this site needed to be rezoned. So the site currently is shown as Bridge Street Public, which was in order to recognize the existing park and then providing that opportunity for that future greenway connection along what will be future John Shields Parkway. The proposed rezoning for this parcel is to the Bridge Street District Residential, which, as you can see, is comparable to what is surrounding to the north, east, and south of this particular parcel. Planning and Zoning Commission reviewed this at their March 12th meeting and found, based on their analysis as well as staff's, that the proposal meets the future land use designation and the area plan and recommended approval to City Council of this rezoning at the second reading.
Very good. Thank you. Council questions? Yep. Tim?
I was just going to ask Amy, do you have any insight? Was there anything out of the ordinary?
Absolutely not.
Very good. Thank you.
All right, there'll be a second reading, public hearing, April 27th, council meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have Resolution 34-15.
Accepting the lowest and best bid for the State Route 161 Riverside Drive Roundabout, Part 1, Riverside Drive Realignment, Part 2, and other public improvements project.
Introduction. Thank you. Megan?
Good evening, council members. The city consolidated several improvements into one bid package, which will advance multiple improvements in an efficient and cost-effective manner. The improvements included in the bid package are the State Route 161 Riverside Drive intersection improvement, which has been mentioned multiple times tonight, the realignment of Riverside Drive, sanitary sewer installation, park grading for the future park that'll be between Riverside Drive along the riverfront, a piece of John Shields Parkway from Riverside Drive to Mooney Street, and utility installation and burial for both AEP and Duck Bank. 3 bids were submitted, with the lowest being 10% under estimate, and staff recommends council approval of this resolution, accepting as lowest and best the bid of Complete General Construction and authorizing the city manager to enter into contract with Complete General. A memo was included in your packet with more details on these projects, and I like what I heard about keeping our eye on the prize.
That's it. Very good. Any council questions, discussion?
Yeah, I was just, I was really impressed that with the kind of building season going on right now, that this came in at $2.5 million less than the estimate. I was just really surprised.
Yes, we're
If
very
anything,
pleased.
I expected it to be over.
That was the fear, but we were very pleased, and we think packaging all these improvements into one really helped save some money. And also the contractor that was the low bidder on this project has the interchange, the 33-270 interchange, which is in close proximity, so I'm sure they'll be able to share resources between the two projects.
That was fantastic. Thank you.
I wanted to compliment staff on the way that you packaged it. I think that makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons, just from an efficiency standpoint. So, good job.
Yeah, we think having one contractor there will really simplify things, and
yes.
having multiple contractors would have been
Good
a
point.
nightmare.
Yep.
Definitely.
Tim?
Yes, I just wanted to point out what council is well aware of, as is staff. But in this memo, I think it's worth noting for the benefit of the public that, and particularly those that believe that there is a direct link between the Bridge Street District and the development and this roundabout construction. As your memo points out, the safety concerns with respect to this intersection arose in 1993. That's 2 decades ago that the city recognized safety concerns with respect to that particular intersection. And then much later, but still prior to any consideration of the Bridge Street District and the Bridge Park development that is currently under consideration, in the 2005 to 2007 timeframe, your memo points out that the city analyzed several intersection improvement alternatives, which is how we find ourselves in this place today. So just want to reiterate that what several council members, if not all of us, have said previously to this point in time, that this intersection was going to be improved, needed to be improved, long before any consideration of any development within the Bridge Street District. And, I'm sure that there are people, including yourself, that are far more expert than I am with respect to traffic, although I think it's fairly obvious, that a great deal of the pressure on this particular intersection comes from outside of Dublin. The development in southern Delaware County that uses Riverside Drive to traverse south, to point south and so forth. There's just the pressure on that intersection and the cars that go through that intersection are much greater than the growth that Dublin has experienced in the last 20 years, so in any event.
And really in concert with that, we think about one of the highest priorities that we've heard from our residents, and it's been a goal of this council, is the development of the Sciato River corridor. It is true the road is being moved a little bit, but it's really in the conquest of that goal to open the riverfront up and use that amenity for all of our residents. So good points.
And it's about safety as well. Absolutely. I mean, obviously, I think that also in here it's the 4th highest in traffic and 3rd highest crash location in the city.
Yes, it is.
So that's an obviously important consideration. Thanks.
Okay.
The aesthetic side, and I think you're right, Mike. If you go down the River Road, you're looking at parks all the way down that other cities and the city of Columbus have utilized and had for their citizens. And this is the first chance we've had to really take this and create a park for our people in our jurisdiction that we're responsible for. So I think it's a great improvement and a great amenity.
Good.
Yes.
Amy?
Oh, go ahead, Marilee. One thing that I just wanted to, I know you're going to do this, but we did such a great job when we first started doing roundabouts, educating the public about them and having the videos and all those other kind of things. I guess because I do have a number of friends outside of Dublin who go down Riverside Drive, like to go to the zoo and to go to businesses and this kind of thing, that have asked a lot of questions about it, and it will even be much larger than ones we're accustomed to here. But not every community in Ohio or in central Ohio has put in as many roundabouts even as we have, and so there might be more unfamiliarity with roundabouts in general, and then one of this magnitude, that we really want to enhance that educational process that we used originally. I know you weren't here, but Sandra will remember that we had all these ways that you could learn how to ride roundabouts, you know, and that might be, additional ways to educate the general public.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Yeah.
Will do.
One thing I wanted to add to that, I've had a couple people ask questions about pedestrian safety and saying, oh my gosh, if it's a nightmare now, getting across the roadway, it's going to be 10 times worse when you're on a roundabout. And I'm like, no, a roundabout's much safer. I'd much rather walk, ride a bike through a roundabout than any other type of intersection. I'm not sure, we have the graphic somewhere on the website. We saw it here where it shows the cars moving through the intersection. Does it also show pedestrians?
I don't recall if it does, but we do have the simulation out on the website, and we can take a look at that and see.
Okay, yeah, just somehow some information about how much easier it will be to access the pedestrian or the walkable element of a roundabout versus that intersection as it exists today.
Yeah, we
that
can
would
do
be really
something
helpful
along those lines. And one thing to note is with the roundabout option that we ended up selecting and designing and are planning on building, the pedestrian only has to cross one direction of traffic at a time. So they'll be able to cross one direction, stop, and then proceed along the next direction. So
right.
It really is an added safety benefit.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Ann?
Vice Mayor Gerber? Yes. Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Ms. Saleh?
Yes.
Mr. Lechleiter?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson? Mayor Keenan?
Yes.
And Mr. Nitzy-Zerker?
Okay, that brings us to Resolution 35-15.
Appointing members to the Architectural Review Board of the City of Dublin.
I'll introduce it.
Okay. Rick?
Yeah, the admin committee, actually the admin committee as a whole, met and has made the following recommendation: that Everett Muser and Jeannie Fox be appointed to 3-year terms on the Architectural Review Board, such terms expiring on March 31, 2018.
Very good. Any comments? Ann?
Mr. Lechleiter?
Yes.
Mayor Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson? Mr. Nitzy-Zerker?
Yes.
Ms. Saleh? Yes. Vice Mayor Gerber?
Yes.
Thank you, Rick. Resolution 36-15.
Resolution of intent to appropriate 5.120 acres, more or less fee simple right-of-way, of which 1.308 acres are located within present road occupied in a 0.387 acre more or less temporary easement from BPACQ LLC and Tim Hortons as lessee of the property for the property located at 6490 Riverside Drive for construction of a roundabout, the intersection of State Route 161 and Riverside Drive, and relocation of Riverside Drive to the east.
Introduction?
I'll introduce it.
Thank you.
Mr. Keenan, this is the protocol under the revised code for us to continue moving forward to get the land we need to build the infrastructure. We will continue, as we always do, talking to the property owners, and I think I briefed you earlier on some of the land acquisition issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Council questions? If not, we'll have a vote on the resolution.
Mr. Nitzy-Zerker?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson? Yes. Mayor Keenan?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gerber?
Yes.
Ms. Saleh? Yes. Mr. Lechleiter?
Yes.
And we have an informational presentation on the community reinvestment area. Angel?
Yes, I know you've had a number of presentations this evening, so I will try to make this informative yet quick.
Thank you. Yeah.
So since February, we have brought forward a number of informational sessions to you regarding economic development tools. This has been done in advance of anticipated development within the Bridge Street districts. These former presentations have focused on tax increment financing as well as the new community authority. The tools utilized vary greatly depending on the type of development. Redevelopment is inherently more challenging than greenfield development, in part because of the non-performing assets that oftentimes sit on this land that must be dealt with. Thus requires more incentives and tools to encourage the redevelopment to occur, as our city manager articulated earlier this evening. A community reinvestment area, or a CRA, is an economic development tool that was established in 1977 and revised in 1994 to encourage the development of new structures and revitalization of existing housing stock through use of an exemption on real property. They are frequently used where redevelopment is at play because of these higher costs. Those higher costs are a result of lost economic value of the existing structure and the cost to demolish those structures, infrastructure needs, and just the added cost of a dense mixed use nature of the redevelopment projects in and of themselves. CRAs are governed under Ohio Revised Code sections 37, 35, 65 through 70. The establishment of a CRA can be beneficial to the property owner because it provides real property tax exemptions for property owners who construct new buildings when agreements are in place and executed between the property owner and the local government. So therefore, property owners and or developers can demonstrate to lenders a predictability and a reduction in their expenditures as a result of the savings on the tax exemption on the new construction. It makes redevelopment projects economically feasible, especially for redevelopment projects, because of the higher initial costs. And as we've come to understand over our discussions with developers over the past couple of months, banks are increasingly recognizing this property tax savings to look at their net operating income. Because they have higher net operating income as a result of these tax savings, they're able to leverage that with the debt they are going to obtain in order to facilitate the redevelopment. When used in conjunction with a new community authority, as we've discussed in the past here, the CRA has impact is that there is a real property tax exemption on new construction. When there's a new community authority in place, if you recall, that board imposes a community development charge on the properties with the NCA. A community development charge then proves to be a more predictable revenue stream that can be used to pay debt service and other NCA eligible expenditures. The benefits to the city in providing a CRA is that it does provide an incentive to property owners to make meaningful investments in their property, because without that incentive, redevelopment is not likely to occur. The city has had 2 instances of CRAs established here, the Britton Parkway CRA, which was established in 1994, and the Tuttle Crossing CRA, which was established in 1989. While all of the economic development tools that we've discussed through these informational sessions have been used in Dublin, CRAs have not been used to the extent as other communities. CRAs are governed, if you will, through the Ohio Development Services Agency. So any CRA created and the agreements with the property owners has to be filed and reported on annually with the Department of Development Services Agency. And you can see per their website, there are currently 93 active CRA agreements within Franklin County alone in most of our neighboring suburbs, and then 737 agreements statewide. In order to create a CRA, the local government must create a housing survey, or conduct a housing survey, pardon me. This survey is one in which the housing facilities or structures of historical significance are located, and new housing construction and repair of the existing facilities or structures is discouraged. Instead, you would rather have new construction occur. The purpose of this housing survey is to, 1, ensure that the selected geographical area that is to comprise the CRA meets the statutory requirements, and 2, inform council as the voting authority of the composition and condition of the housing stock within the CRA so that they have a context in making decisions regarding the CRA area. The city staff are conducting a housing survey, and that is being wrapped up within the next week within the Bridge Street District area. Once that housing survey is completed, legislation is brought forward to City Council for consideration. That legislation accomplishes three things. First, it adopts the housing survey. That housing survey must identify at least 2 residential properties that are experiencing disinvestment. And it's important to note here that if we modify a CRA or establish a new CRA, you have to find 2 additional houses that are experiencing this level of disinvestment. The legislation also defines the boundaries of the CRA. We have had the request by more than one developer within the Bridge Street District, and when I say developer, I also mean property owner within the Bridge Street District to utilize the CRA. As such, and based on the aforementioned requirement to have at least 2 houses within the area in your housing survey, we are taking that into consideration as we formulate our recommendation for council as to what the boundaries of this first CRA should be. Should it be particular to one particular project, or should it encompass a larger area so that it's done and set up? Finally, this piece of legislation will define the incentive that can be provided within the boundaries of the CRA. That incentive can be up to 100% real property tax exemptions for a period of time not to exceed 15 years, depending on certain criteria. Staff are likely to recommend a 15-year 100% exemption on new construction of residential, commercial, and retail structures. When I say residential, what we mean is multifamily residential, not single-family housing, because that is not something we are looking to facilitate within the Bridge Street District area. I have an asterisk next to this point because it's important to note that establishing a CRA district does not give any property owner the right to the exemption right off the bat. A separate detailed CRA agreement must be executed between the city and the property owner in order for the property owner to receive that incentive. And that is the case on any commercial properties. So that's why we are taking into very careful consideration so that it isn't a blanket approval, that any agreement between the city and a property owner would be considered on a project-by-project basis. Once that legislation is adopted by council, the city must publish in a local newspaper once a week for 2 weeks after the area is established. After that time, the city must remit a petition to the Ohio Development Services Agency in which they then approve the establishment of the CRA. They have 30 days to take this action. And then after such time, after the state has approved it and after city council has approved it, then any property owner, through negotiations with the city, could come forward and enter into an agreement with the city, subject to council approval, in order to be granted the property tax exemption. So these would be subject to city council approval and brought forward for discussion in a public setting. We oftentimes get asked what the impact is of these types of incentives on the school district. The use of the CRA is authorized under the Bridge Street District Cooperative Agreement that was entered into last April between the city and the school district. And at the end of the day, in summary, it does not have any additional financial impact to the school district. It is no different than the creation of a TIF, because if you will recall, in the area defined by the Bridge Street District Cooperative Agreement, the city has agreed to compensate the school district $1.5 million a year for 32 years and then $2 million for a total of $50 million in exchange for the ability to set up these types of incentive districts. Again, in years 1 through 15, the city would capture any TIF revenues generated. In years 16 through 30, whether it's a TIF or a CRA, the school district would receive 10% what they would have received had the exemption not been put in place. So simply put, the CRA simply provides an additional financing tool that helps address the specific needs of a particular project. Upcoming steps, we are working to bring forward a piece of legislation on April 27th, estimated, that would establish this district with second reading around May 4th. At that point in time, council will be asked to consider whether they want to pass this piece of legislation as an emergency, given that the Ohio Department of or Development Services Agency then has 30 days, in order to approve the establishment of the CRA. We can discuss this at a later point of time, but we wanted to go ahead and outline for you what the upcoming steps would be. So once that is approved by the Development Services Agency, then future agreements would be brought forward between the city and property owners that would be subject to council approval. And with that, I will answer any questions that council may have.
We've seen this several times, so council?
I'm trying to be consistent.
When will we be finalizing the geographic area?
That will be finalized when we bring forward for first reading the legislation. So hopefully April 27th at your next meeting.
Remind me if under the CRA, can those boundaries be added to later?
We can expand the geography of the CRA, but keep in mind anytime we expand it, we have to find 2 additional houses that are in disrepair and investment is not being made in them.
Okay.
So it does make it a little bit more challenging.
Any other questions?
So I just wanted to clarify one thing. Right now, regardless of what we have talked about, TIFs, we've talked about CRAs and NCAs, all the entities are receiving a certain level of tax revenue, the township, the schools, the zoo, everybody. And regardless of what we put in place in terms of these economic development incentive tools, all of those entities continue to receive what they are receiving today, with the exception of the disinvestment if something is torn down, for example, and the property value goes down.
That's correct. Any property owner has the ability to demolish their property. So it depends on when these incentives are put into place. If a TIF or a CRA is put into place before a building is demolished and that sets the level, that impact is different than if the building is demolished and then the incentive is put on, which has reduced the base value. So my response to you would be that's consistent with what would happen anywhere throughout the city, regardless if it were within Bridge Street or any other part of the city. But to that point, I'd also like to point out that if you recall in our agreement with the school district, there was a measure in place that come 2016, $70 million in value needs to be created within Bridge Street in order to keep those $1.5 million annual payments continuing. In the case of a TIF or a CRA, even though it's a property tax exemption, that value still counts towards that $70 million. So again, going back to the fact that if we issued a CRA and $100 million was generated by it, that will certainly count towards that threshold for the purposes of continuing those payments to the schools.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Okay. That brings us to staff comments. Dana?
Yes, thank you. A few comments. First of all, a reminder that the Spring Neighborhood Leadership Meeting will be held Thursday, April 23rd from 6:30 to 8:30. Just a highlight of the agenda for that is registration will start at about 6:15. I just want to emphasize that there will be an opportunity or an input session for the new Sciato Riverfront Park. There'll be several of these, but this is one opportunity. When we had people coming to this, we wanted to have the opportunity, provide the opportunity for them to give input on that. So we'll capture that. At 7:30, the meeting will actually begin. If you could give us a heads up as to which of you will be there that evening, certainly obviously welcome to make any comments at the opening of that if you would like. I'll be prepared also to do a welcoming comment. We'll go on to some information from our police division, from the fire prevention division, also information regarding solicitation of regulations, digital media information or social media information will also be briefed. We also will give an update on infrastructure improvements specifically related to 270-33 and Riverside Drive roundabout and realignment. Again, a reiteration of some of the information here tonight. And we also that evening will give some information regarding Bridge Street, specifically the community survey results, will be briefed again, and then an overview and update of various projects and activities going on within Bridge Street. So we'll use that as a venue to continue to inform and give out information. Citizen University has kicked off. We're into our third class of that. It's just wanted to let you know we did actually execute that program. It seems to be very popularly received right now, and a lot of great feedback on that. Very excited. The employees have really enjoyed getting in front of our residents and talking about what they do and how they do it. So it's been a good experience so far, with several more classes to go. Also just want to inform you that the new community authority members that you appointed, we will have them here Wednesday evening at 6 p.m. just for a background information, try to get them familiar with what's going on and where we've been, so that they, if this gets formed officially, they would not be caught cold and trying to get caught up on information. I would also point out that, as you know, Crawford Hoying advanced the request for an NCA. They have named their 3 appointees, and I have a copy of that letter if you'd like it, but it is Matt Starr, who is with Crawford Hoying for a 2-year term, Chris Wagner, also with Crawford Hoying for a 1-year term, and Josiah Huber, who was with, and I did have the name of the firm that he was with. I don't think I have it on me, though. He is, does anyone remember?
He's with DePerna and Associates.
Okay, thank you. But nonetheless appointed by Crawford Hoying, just so you're aware, their appointees have been made, should this all be formed and come to fruition down the road, but I just want to make you aware of that. Also a reminder, April 18th is Household Hazardous Waste Collection Day, and you know there are Earth Week activities going on from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. at Ashland, Inc. I want to thank Ashland for their ongoing cooperation with that program. They've been extremely helpful in supporting us for many years with that, and we really appreciate that. Also just want to let you know that we will get a summary regarding your council retreat to you in your next packet. We have that drafted, and we'll give you that information. When you get that, if there are things that we left off of that you felt should have been included in that summary, just feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call, and we'll get that added in. And then the last thing I wanted to mention this earlier when Trustee King was here. Council had directed me in your retreat to try to get together a joint meeting between yourselves, the schools, and the township relative to Bridge Street, and information regarding that. So I just want to let you know I am and will be working on that, and we'll try to see if we can't come up with some dates. And that's all I have. Thank you for the opportunity to give you some information.
Very good. Thank you, Dana. So that brings us to council committee reports. Planning and zoning rep, Amy?
Yes. Last Thursday, we met for 3 hours to ultimately ended up approving the rezoning for Riviera, and that will be forthcoming to council. Lots and lots of debate about things. Ultimately, I think most of the residents in the area are okay with the development as it's proposed. The developer did come a long way in terms of what they, where they started and where they ended up. So that'll be forthcoming. I'm not sure, Dana, do we know when that will make it to council for first reading? May 4th?
I think it's a first week of May, first meeting of May.
Okay, thank you. And that was the extent of our agenda, and several of us are very excited to be attending APA in Seattle.
Good.
Coming up this weekend, so that should be
a great trip for our new folks as well as our experienced folks. So.
My goodness, yes, absolutely.
Terrific. Administrative committee, Rick?
Nothing to report.
Thank you. Community development, John?
Nothing to report.
Finance, Marilee?
Yes, we had a quarterly meeting earlier tonight, and I'm happy to say that the city is in great financial condition, and while we've had a little bit of reduction, it is primarily due to a couple of major companies moving away, but our mix, I think our diversity of companies helps us during these kind of time frames, so thank you.
Very good. Public services, Amy?
I do not have anything to report.
DAC, John?
Yeah, so the question is, what are you going to be doing Friday night? And I'm hoping that you're all going to be at the Dublin Arts Garden Party.
I think we have to be at Hidaka at noon, don't we?
Yeah, and you can finish Hidaka and head on over there and give your contribution. This is the big fundraiser for Dublin Arts, and it's going to have some fantastic food and a very interesting auction it always has with lots of art and a really nice evening. So rain or shine, OCLC. If you're not doing anything, please come over. I think you're going to have a great night, and bring your significant other and enjoy supporting the Dublin Arts Council.
Very good. Board of Education, Greg?
There was a meeting, last Wednesday, was it, Dana? I had a conflict. I couldn't attend. Is there anything that you want to report back?
Sure, yeah. Angel and I attended a meeting with Dr. Hoadley, Steve Osborne, school board member Lynn May, and Scott.
Melody?
Thank you. Having a bad night. Anyway, Mr. Melody was there as well. We discussed a number of items, brought them up to date on various projects in the pipeline that are really economic development oriented. Throughout the city of Dublin, we talked about a number of projects, talked about 33 initiatives, spent time talking about Bridge Street, talked about impacts, talked about various information relative to the types of information that Angel's been briefing the last few meetings. So it was a great exchange of information. Definitely wanted to keep that up. There was a suggestion about the possibility of a second council member attending that. I don't know if you want to bring that up, Greg, or not, but that issue was brought up. I don't know if you want to address that tonight. But it was a great meeting. Want to continue to do that. And I would just also emphasize that Dr. Hoadley and I continue to meet one-on-one on a regular basis as well.
Very good.
Yeah, I think, Rick, somebody might have mentioned something to you as well, and then they brought it up at the meeting. I don't have a strong position on it one way or the other. You know, the more people that attend, the better. I can continue to attend to these meetings.
I'm not looking for another meeting, but I did talk with the superintendent, and he mentioned the fact that since we're trying to put together a collaborative effort here, that because I had been the liaison for a number of years, he thought maybe to stop in from, not at every meeting, but once in a while, and that's fine. But if there's other council members that want to do it, that, you know, go ahead and do it.
I have an email that has all the meetings that have been set up at this point. I'm happy to circulate it, and if anybody wants to show up. They're over at the administration building late in the afternoon, 4:30ish.
But just send that email around then, and
I will.
Go from there. Okay, Morpsey, Mary Lee?
Yes, we had a MARPC board meeting last week. Megan and Dana and I attended it. And I'd like to thank Angel for becoming a member of the Investment Strategy Committee for MARPC, as that's been something that the board has requested for a while, and so they finally have that put in place. The World Council spoke to the group, and that will be another group of World Council, the Council on World Affairs. And here's the report. I'll leave that in the council room. And that will be another group as we expand our global engagements and interaction that we will want to, and as we look at sister city relationships, that we would want to develop a more formal relationship with. Thank you.
Okay. I think that brings us to roundtable. Great. Amy?
I just wanted to call out the prescription drug disposal drop box that's going to be located at the Justice Center. Dublin ACT Coalition, I think, was responsible for bringing that, or that idea, or at least championing that idea. And I just want to compliment us on taking that step, because so many people just don't know what to do, and we definitely don't want to throw those things down and where it makes its way into the wastewater stream. But it's really important to get those things out of your house and into the hands of a place where they can be disposed of safely. So I'm really glad that that's happening, and I hope we spend a lot of time rolling that information out every way that we possibly can, newspaper, pigeon, whatever, carrier pigeon, whatever we need to do, because I know, just myself, I've got like 3 bottles of things from old surgeries. I don't know what to do with these things. Just got to get rid of them. I read with interest the Dublin Road South Bike Path letter, and I just wanted to make sure that the Homeowners Association presidents in the area would also receive that information. And I think it's important to note, at least it's my understanding, that the property owner that was not cooperative was the primary reason why we didn't get to construction this year, and it was not so much a city problem. We were ready to go. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Merely.
Yes, first I'd really like to congratulate Planning and Zoning and the citizens and Charlie Ruma really for listening to each other and developing a much different, presenting at least a much different development at Riviera. If you looked at those numbers, they are substantially different than they were in the original plan that he brought forth. So I think it's just a demonstration of community participation that can impact and does positively impact the outcome. Dana, I was wondering if you had any idea when we might be getting our communication plan from the Gallagher Consulting Company?
Yes, in fact, spent quite a bit of time on that Friday and again today, and we have been on an ongoing basis. I have a memo prepared for you, and we are adding to that as soon as tomorrow or when? It's on my desk. The actual framework of the plan and talking points and so forth. Also, and I appreciate you bringing that up, but part of that, when I get that to you, will also suggest that there's training as part of that. We've often offered communications training to all of our staff, and especially our senior staff, leadership, people in leadership positions, and council members over the years, opportunities to come in and get some level of communications training. So we will offer that to you. Could do that in groups of 2 or 3 or whatever you like, whatever's convenient for you. So you'll get the framework of that plan, those key points, the framework about significant communication issues, and then we'll ask you to get in touch with us as to when you'd be available to come in.
And last, I just wanted to thank Michelle Crandall for doing a presentation with me at the City Clerks Conference, I guess it's called. We did go up to the penitentiary, and we were inside doing this training. The acoustics weren't great, but we didn't have a bunch of yelling prisoners, you know. Although I must say there were incredible numbers of people touring this place. It was just unbelievable.
They let you out of there.
Yes, they left us out. But we did a workshop, a training presentation actually to the whole group on working with boards and commissions. And one thing that I thought was very interesting, I mean, the people made a lot of interesting comments to us, but one of them, the most interesting one, was how different communities appoint their volunteers to their boards and commissions. And I think they sort of concluded that the reason ours were probably more effective and more organized and goal-oriented and sort of stayed on task more was both because of our appointment process being done by council and a staff person being assigned to every board and commission. And many of them, it's nothing like that. And so they, the city manager appoints whoever, and and so they have problems with attendance. They have problems with people canceling meetings just on their own. They just decide not to meet, and do things that really we don't have those kind of issues at all. So I think they appreciated learning about some alternative ways that they might take back to their communities on how the process might work and how to engage more citizens in the application process so they would have a more diverse approach, people they could appoint. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim.
I likewise wanted to compliment the police department as well as anybody else involved in the establishment of this prescription drug drop-off box. I think it's a great idea. I've read about this occurring in other places, and I'm really glad that, that Dublin is doing this. Also had the opportunity on March 25th to attend the DEC, or the Dublin Entrepreneurial Center Open House. Dana was there as well as folks from economic development staff and so forth, and I'm sure all of you have been there at one time or another, but it was very well attended, and is always, to me anyway, an energizing event. I spoke to the gentleman, maybe Dana or someone else will remember, but it was EcoChem, I believe, is the name of the very small company which is located in the DEC, and whose process, it's a fuel-based company. Help me out, Dana.
Yeah, it's a company that started here it's a clean diesel product. You might recall that we beta tested that in school buses, some of our fleet facility. I think the fire department also used it. So anyway, yeah, they've had some great success, which I'm sure you're probably going to talk about.
Yep. Right, and so they had the good fortune of having a booth in Cleveland at the event that President Obama attended, and just so happened that all the media was surrounding that booth, and so they got a lot of play in the Wall Street Journal and the national media. And the young man whose name is escaping me at the moment, and I apologize, said that they'd been receiving telephone calls from not only all over the country, but all over the world with respect to this process. So, you know, just one small example of what's going on at the DEC. So I thought that was a great story. With some of the rest of my council colleagues, attended the MORPC annual meeting on April 2nd. And then this past Saturday, attended the Community Champions Awards, which took place at Jerome High School. I know many of my council colleagues have participated in the past. This is an event, I think this was its 10th year. It is sponsored by the Dublin Chamber of Commerce as well as the Dublin Schools. There are many businesses in Dublin who also serve as sponsors. Of course, members of the Dublin Chamber of Commerce. The City of Dublin is a sponsor as well. But that is also an inspiring event. By the way, the awards are for non-academic achievements. It's about volunteerism. And when you hear some of the stories about what these young people do, and down to the third grade, and I would be remiss in not pointing out that our law director's granddaughter received a medal, but it's amazing what these kids do, you know, in service to their community in Dublin and beyond. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Nothing, Mayor. Thank you.
Rick? Okay, I've got a couple items, and really in concert. Dana and myself, Marilee and Tim joined that. We're at the annual meeting, the MORPC meeting, and wanted to give congratulations to our former city manager, Marcia Grigsby, who was recognized last week by the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. She received the organization's William H. Anderson Award, which recognizes a current or past board member who exemplifies outstanding leadership, a vision for the community and the region, and commitment to MORPC. Marcia was recognized for her guidance in conversations about how to invest in infrastructure to benefit Central Ohio communities and the region at large. Her involvement was critical in creating the partnership between ODOT and MORPC to fund and advance Dublin's 270-33 interchange project. It was a really nice event, and she went up on stage, accepted the award. She didn't say anything. Everybody else did.
She ran off the stage.
She ran off real quick. Actually, Mayor Coleman there were 3 awards given. Mayor Coleman received one, and he spoke eloquently about his departure and so forth. And what was the last fellow's name?
It was,
you know, he had the accent. Yelmer, yeah. Very, very excellent. I remind everybody that your ethics filings are due on April 15th, along with your taxes. It's, also, and I don't know if anybody mentioned this, but Rick and myself and Trustee Chuck Cranstuber, Representative Mike Duffy, and Dana all attended Leadership Dublin. We sat on a panel, served on that, and kind of fielded questions. And it's always an interesting group at Leadership Dublin. I think they're about to graduate that class. One last final thing. I received just today a letter from the mayor mayor from Mashiko, and thanking me for the trip and the heartfelt letter that I sent to him. We kind of reviewed some of the things that we were involved in. They were so grateful for the gifts that we sent over, as they always are. They mentioned the fact we had badges for all the students there, the taiko drum group, and we have a taiko drum group coming from Dublin to Mashiko, I think May or June, with the group here that's traveling. But read this. Last but not least, thanks again for your suggestion about the sister city affiliation. I read the article that you talk about Mashiko on FB. I don't know what that is, but I mean internet or something. Facebook?
Facebook.
Wow. Boy, am I out of it, huh?
Facebook.
Never did figure out how to use that daggone thing. I hope to continue to communicate with each other through the activities of Tyco, et cetera, and to have an opportunity to conclude a sister city agreement in the future. I wish us both luck for our towns. And so it was a nice letter, maybe something we can maybe move forward to Mayor Lee's earlier point as well. That's all I have. We'll stand adjourned.